In this video, we'll show you how to change the rear axle bearing and seals on your Ford F-150. You can find them on CarParts.com via the link in the description. For safety reasons, we strongly suggest watching our video on how to jack your Ford F-150 safely. In order to remove the rear axle shaft, you need to disengage it from the differential. For this kind of operation, it is important to always start by unscrewing the filler hole plug, because if it remains stuck after draining the fluid, the vehicle will be immobilized. Now you need to remove the brake system. To do so, we recommend watching our video, How to Replace the Rear Brakes Ford F-150. Place a fluid collection tray under the differential to catch the differential fluid that will flow out. Unscrew the filler hole plug using a ratchet and a 3/8" square socket. Start the process with the ratchet and finish it off by hand. Using a fork, unclip all the clips located on the differential cover. Using a ratchet and a long 13mm socket, unscrew the 12 bolts holding the differential cover. The components to be removed are very often seized up, so don't hesitate to brush and to use penetrating oil to make removal easier. Remove the differential cover. You can use a chisel and a hammer. You can also use a screwdriver to help you. Let the fluid run out for about 10 minutes. For great content, our best price, and fast shipping, download the CarParts.com app now. You'll now need to remove the ABS sensor from the wheel knuckle. Using a ratchet and a 10mm socket, unscrew the ABS sensor's retaining bolt. You can now carefully remove the sensor, making small lateral back and forward movements. Set the gear shift lever to neutral so that you can easily turn the differential and access the pinion shaft lock bolt. You can now freely rotate the drive shaft in order to access the pinion shaft lock bolt. To prevent the differential from rotating when unscrewing the lock bolt, insert a large flathead screwdriver between the rear axle case and a ring gear bolt. Using a ratchet, an extender, and a 3/8" socket, unscrew the lock bolt from the pinion shaft, then remove it. You can now extract the pinion shaft by pushing it outward. The retaining clip is very difficult to remove. You need to push the rear axle shaft toward the differential in order to have full access to the retaining clip. Remove the clip using needle nose pliers. You can now remove the rear axle shaft. We recommend using a slide hammer. You now have access to the rear axle seal and to the rear axle bearing. Remove the used seal. You can use a hook. It might prove difficult to extract. Using a screwdriver, pry out the rear axle seal until it can be rotated into its housing. You can use a chisel and a hammer. Then remove it. Then clean the impurities at the gasket with a paper towel. You can now see the rear axle bearing. In order to remove the rear axle bearing, you must have the proper equipment, which in this case is a bearing removal tool. Insert the moving part behind the bearing, then using the bolt, press the washer on the outer part of the bearing to lock the tool. Secure the tool on a slide hammer, then extract the rear axle bearing by tapping with a slide hammer. Before fitting the rear axle bearing back on, you must clean the seal surface to ensure it is completely impermeable. You can use fine sandpaper to remove the various residues from the seal's surface. Finish with brake cleaner and wipe with a paper towel. You can order the rear axle bearing and seals used in the video on CarParts.com via the link in the description. Take the new bearing. Attention! The bearing must be inserted properly. Ensure that you are inserting the side of the bearing that is more rounded on the differential side. The shape of this side facilitates insertion. Apply assembly grease to facilitate the installation of the new bearing. Place the new rear axle bearing in its position. Then use a bearing installation tool and a hammer to drive the bearing all the way to the stop in its position. Take the new seal. Then fit the rear axle seal into its position. Use the bearing installation tool and the hammer to finalize the installation. Apply assembly grease to facilitate the installation. Take the rear axle shaft and insert it all the way into its slot. Then reinsert the retaining clip. You can use needle nose pliers. Then pull on the axle shaft to block the retaining clip in its housing so that you can insert the pinion shaft. Reinsert the pinion shaft. Rotate the axle shaft so that you can replace the lock bolt. On this vehicle, the lock bolt tends to break in the differential. We therefore advise you to replace it with a new one. Then replace the lock bolt initially by hand. Block the rotation with a flathead screwdriver. Then tighten it until it makes contact with the ratchet. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Before replacing the differential cover, you need to clean the seal surface to ensure a perfect seal. Protect the differential with a clean cloth. Remove the used seal with a razor blade. Then, scrub with fine sandpaper. Using a cylindrical brush, clean the bolt head's locations. Remove the cloth. Finish with brake cleaner and wipe with a paper towel. Repeat the same operations on the differential cover. Once perfectly clean, thinly apply silicone gasket maker in order to ensure a perfect seal on the differential. Since the differential is open, clean the bolts too if they are full of sealant. Apply medium-strength thread locker to prevent accidental unscrewing. Replace the differential cover, first tightening the bolts by hand. Then, screw them back in with a ratchet until they make contact. Finish tightening the bolts in staggered order using a torque wrench. Put the retaining clips back in place. Insert the sensor into its housing. Then, retighten the retaining bolt. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Now put the brake system back in place. To do so, we recommend watching our video, How to Replace the Rear Brakes Ford F-150. Now you need to add fluid back into the differential. This step must be done with care and precision. First, lower your truck back onto the ground as the differential fluid must be filled with the vehicle flat. You can order the differential fluid used in the video on CarParts.com via the link in the description. Then, using an oil syringe or a bottle with a filling spout, fill the differential until the fluid overflows from the hole, indicating that you have added enough fluid to the differential. Clean the differential's filler cap well because it is magnetic and there is often grime left on it. Now you can screw the filler cap back on. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Clean up the fluid that overflowed from the differential. Operation complete.
Quality parts, priced right, CarParts.com.